Impeachment, said Alexander Hamilton, is a method of national inquest into the conduct of public men. It means to stop, to impede, from the French empêcher and the Old English impeachin, to stop the ruler from becoming a tyrant. The English had begun the process in 1215 when they forced King John to sign the Magna Carta, protecting the rights of the nobles and prohibiting John from being an absolute king. By the 14th century, the English Parliament had begun to use the instrument of impeachment, not against the king directly, because he was, by divine right, the king, but against his ministers, when, in the name of the king, they misused public funds, interfered with justice, and in other ways became unrestrained in their exercise of power. In the 17th century, Parliament declared impeachment to be the chief institution for the preservation of government. When the Americans broke away from England, they didn't want a king at all. They didn't want an absolute ruler who was beyond the law. At the Federal Convention in Carpenter Hall, July 20th, 1787, they debated the question, shall the executive be removed on impeachments? George Mason of Virginia said, shall any man be above justice? Above all, shall that man be above it who can commit the most extensive injustice? Edmund Randolph said, the executive will have great opportunities of abusing his power, particularly in time of war, when the military force, and in some respects the public money, will be in his hands. Should no regular punishment be provided, it will be irregularly inflicted by tumults and insurrections. What was the practice before this, asked Benjamin Franklin, in cases where the chief magistrate rendered himself obnoxious? Why, recourse was had to assassination, in which he was not only deprived of his life, but of the opportunity of vindicating his character. It would be the best way, therefore, to provide in the Constitution for the regular punishment of the executive when his conduct should deserve it, and for his honorable acquittal when he should be unjustly accused. It was voted at the Federal Convention in Philadelphia that the President shall be removable on impeachments. The final draft of the Constitution added, the Vice President and all civil officers, but the main concern was with the President and the possibility that he might abuse his power. Who could have guessed then how much the country would change? How much the power of the President would grow? Shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. High crimes and misdemeanors is a technical phrase. It refers specifically to the kind of offense which only people in positions of great power can commit, most particularly the chief executive. Only once before the 20th century has a President of the United States been impeached, our 17th President, Andrew Johnson. It was just after the Civil War, a time of great trouble in the country. Johnson's Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, favored a severe Reconstruction policy toward the South, as did Congress. Johnson was for a lenient policy, for reconciliation. Congress passed a law which, in effect, forbade Johnson to fire Stanton. Johnson said that this was unconstitutional, that a president had to be responsible for the actions of his ministers, and in order to be responsible, he had to have the right to hire and fire them. Almost a century before, James Madison had said, I think it absolutely necessary that the president should have the power of removing from office. It will make him in a peculiar manner responsible for their conduct, and subject him to impeachment himself if he suffers them to perpetuate with impunity high crimes or misdemeanors against the United States, or neglects to superintend their conduct so as to check their excesses. On the constitutionality of the declaration, I have no manner of doubt. Johnson fired Stanton. A committee of the House of Representatives drew up the articles of impeachment and submitted them to the full House. The House voted in favor of impeachment, and the issue went to trial in the Senate. The managers or prosecutors from the House failed by one vote to get the two-thirds majority necessary for conviction. Johnson completed his term of office. It was almost a century before the issue of presidential impeachment came up again. In 1972, a group of men was arrested for breaking into the Democratic National Headquarters. The men were employed by the Committee to Re-elect the President. Questions were immediately raised about the possible involvement of men close to the President. There were indictments and, in some cases, convictions. There were allegations of hush money paid to Watergate burglars to keep them quiet about the involvement of higher-ups. In 1973, the House of Representatives asked its Judiciary Committee to look into these questions and into other ways in which President Nixon might have abused his power, such as unauthorized bombing of Cambodia, possible fraud in the underpayment of his income taxes, a long list of alleged offenses. The Judiciary Committee voted for 3 articles of impeachment involving obstruction of justice, abuse of presidential power, and defiance of congressional authority. With mounting evidence, it became certain that the full House would impeach, and that the Senate, which shall have the sole power to try all impeachments, would convict by at least the necessary 2/3 of the members present, resulting in immediate removal from office and possibly being banned from ever holding office again. On August 9, 1974, Richard M. Nixon resigned the office of President and returned to private life. His vice president, Gerald Ford, assumed the presidency at once, bringing to a conclusion the second episode in the history of the United States involving the impeachment of a president.